And welcome to Breaking the Silence. Yeah, our Friday show. It's been a heck of a week, hasn't it? I know it has been for us. Boy, lots of stuff going on. Meanwhile, I'm trying to work as much as I can without too much interruption on Judy Goldschmidt's show, which is kind of epic because we are moving from 10-minute, 15-minute shows to close to an hour-long shows. And of course, the production value is much higher, and the camera we're working with is much, much higher than we had before. It's a cinema camera, and so on and so forth, and much more involved visuals. So it's probably going to take me another 3 weeks just to finish your show, but it'll be worth the wait. So tonight, we have Mike back. I'm really glad he agreed to come back on. It's great having him on where we can all talk about this stuff. He's got a lot more to share with us, and we only have an hour show, so let's get it going. Hi, Mike.
Hey, how are you doing?
Pretty good. You know, we were surrounded by fire a couple of days ago, and the whole place smells like an ashtray still.
I'm trying to lighten I looked like I was a little hot in the camera there, so.
Oh, yeah. So, last year was when our house got flooded and filled with 5 foot of water. This year we had fires surrounding us. It's nerve-wracking.
Yeah, the whole world is nerve-wracking.
And, of course, the whole thing with the elections, I'm just glad that's all behind us now, for the most part. And everybody around you feeling the way they did. It was just... it was really hard because I don't know about you, Mike, but Mary and I are both very sort of empathic and very sensitive to the consciousness of people all around us. And it was pretty intense leading up to the election and really intense the next day afterwards. And I'm glad to see that that's settling down. So how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I agree that I'm also very sensitive, and for some reason this year, the election season anyway, I didn't absorb it emotionally the same way that I'm surprised because I easily could have.
That's good.
There was just so much of just this that could have been so. I don't want to say crippling, but that's as good a word as any. So I tried to stay above it. And then the morning of the election, when Trump was announced the winner, I just made a little thing. It's as silly as it sounds. I just made a little Facebook kind of meme that I put on Twitter and stuff like that. I've got it.
I saw it.
All it said was make art. Yeah.
Make art. I think that's a good thing to do. You're an artist. You're a heck of a writer. You've got almost as many books as Whitley.
Oh, nobody has no. I don't have that many. No. So.
Well, you got quite a few.
Some of those I did illustrations on a lot of books. If you look at my thing, there's about 40 books, but most of those are where I would do an illustration. And to be fair, some of them I had like one illustration in. Right. I was called in by some author, and hey, I just need one little drawing, and then for some reason I get on the Amazon page for that stuff. So it looks super impressive, but some of those I didn't do.
It is impressive. You've done a lot of work. It's amazing how many of us are artists that have dealt with things that go bump in the dark. So owls have been talked about a lot lately. Judy's case or her story in this show that I'm working on now pretty much starts with her. Well, it doesn't start, but this one particular encounter starts with her driving along in a convertible Mustang back in the 90s and realizing that, just like within arm's reach of her was a all white, pure white owl when she was in Hawaii, flying right next to the car and looking right at her. There are owls in Hawaii, I found out since. I don't know if they were as prevalent back in the 90s. Pure white owls are pretty rare. I mean, not unless it's a snowy owl, but she said it was a barn owl.
Which is pretty common.
Distinctively different. What's interesting about that is when I lived in Granada Hills, I would take my dogs out for a walk, and there was this barn owl that would come down and circle me as I was walking the dogs. And my wife, late wife, saw it one night finally, and it really kind of disturbed her. Um, I mean, it was pretty much all white, which, I mean, normally barn owls, especially in Southern California, would have a lot more brown color to them, I would imagine. And it
Ye-
also screeched at me too.
Well, that's the noise a barn owl or a barn owl makes. Is kind of a hissy screech. It's actually a really spooky sound.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the face was, yeah. So I don't know what that was all about, but you probably know better than I because you spent more time looking into the relationship between owls in this experience and people who have the experiences and how prevalent it is that so many people here tonight, right here in chat, which are our community, have had close encounters with owls.
It's shockingly common.
Yeah.
And it's not just the UFO contact experience that generates owl
No.
experiences. It would be, and this is something I like to do this because it's for me. It's like when I started the research, it was just owls, and then I mean, just owls and UFOs, excuse me. And then when I started to collect stories, these other patterns started to appear, and I can narrow it down to so owls. There's five, and so the first would be owls in connection with a UFO contact experience, or with even just a sighting. Very, very common. Sometimes very, very overtly taking place. Um, and then the others would be owls in meditation. People who meditate will often see owls, and it's usually very telling what they're like if they have an intention to their meditation. That's really interesting when the owl shows up. The next one would be owls and psychedelics, most particularly mushrooms. I have
Hmm.
other accounts of LSD and ayahuasca, but those are so minuscule compared to the number of people who take mushrooms and see owls.
Huh.
And then the third would be owls and shamanic initiation, which is fascinating to me. So people going through the initiatory process of becoming a shaman will see owls. This is well understood in the community of shamans, which there's practicing shamans out there and they talk to each other. And this has been well understood. I mean, I suspect all throughout the ages. And then the final one would be owls and death. And that would be
Yeah.
most particularly the death of a parent. Though I certainly have other accounts, but the numbers of death of a parent really shows up in a
Hmm.
and there's other things I want to show up, but there's simply don't. There's things that feel like they would fit into this pattern. Let me just go through it one more time because it would be UFOs, psychedelics, meditation, shamanic initiation, and death. Those are the five, and really fascinating. So what I have to ask is why. So the owl doesn't seem to be connected to UFOs. The owl seems to be connected to these highly charged human experiences, of which a UFO contact or a close-up UFO setting certainly would be a highly charged experience. And so that the owl is connected to the highly charged experience. So I have to kind of blend the UFO contact experience in with those other things and really, and it's hard to come up with a pragmatic answer that would satisfy, let's say, a scientist, but hopefully
Yeah.
I can dance around and come up with ideas that would maybe not satisfy, but would engage an artist or a poet. I know that sounds a little lofty, but I have to approach it at somehow. So I'm approaching it in that kind of mythic level, like it parallels the like a myth rather than it. So what I'm fighting is, I guess, is that it's very, very difficult to satisfy, like, let's say, a pragmatic scientist with my research. But I find that the people who are looking at these things from an emotional level or from an intuitive level really can tap into the work that I've been doing. in a way that some scientists can't, because I've been told by some scientists they don't like my research. So
Well, no, at least not all of them, that's for sure.
not
But
all of them, but a
there
few
are
have.
some open-minded scientists who understand that there are things that our science can't explain, yet they remain. They're still there, and people have seen it, witnessed it, photographed it. The evidence is there, and there's so many things we can't explain. And
Hmm.
some scientists will admit that and continue on with their interest in it, and then others will just sort of say, well, if I can't prove it, then why would I be interested in it? Or why? Or
Yeah.
as one said to me the other day, well, if you have no proof and you can't prove it, then why should I believe it? And I said, well, you don't have to.
Well,
It's not an obligation. It's something that is your decision. So,
I mean, a journalist has a set of standards they adhere to. So I try to. I don't have no training in being a journalist, but I do try to keep good notes and quote people properly
mhm.
and look for patterns in the accounts. So that would be something a journalist would do rather than something a scientist would do. So as far as on that level, I feel like I try to keep to very high standards.
When I lived in San Francisco, I was only a couple of blocks from the beach, 47th Avenue. I don't know if you're familiar with
A little
the
bit.
the avenues. It was near Playland back then, and the Cliff House. From where I lived, I could hear the seals at night. Thank you, Wes. Very nice of you. Um, and I would occasionally have this not barn owl, a great horned owl. I remember it as a great horned owl, great horn, sitting in my window. You know, now Golden Gate Park wasn't too far away, so I guess it's possible that great horned owls, which are very prevalent up there, spent time in that park, but you rarely saw them. A lot in Marin County. Marin County was, well, especially back in those days, was a lot more wild. It hadn't been so developed, and there was a lot of forest there and a lot of natural indigenous animals. So, but it was just interesting that it was sitting in my windowsill staring in at me. Now, I know you've heard this
Many
many
times.
times. Um, and it still gives me the chills. And I remember that um, the school teacher took us on a field trip, which they do, and they took us to this nature museum in San Francisco. And I remember looking at all the different cages and looking at the animals, and there was this hawk, at least I thought it was a hawk, and it had its head turned around away from me and tucked in like they do. At least that's how I remember it. And then all of a sudden, the head just swung around, looked right at me, and it was a great horned owl, and it startled me. It really did. I didn't scream or anything, but it really, it's a moment I'll never forget because I felt like I had some sort of connection with this creature.
Hmm. Yeah, I
But
know people. Yeah.
I-
So
I've, I've never been able to understand it though.
it's very difficult. I mean, but you're describing an emotional response,
Hmm.
and that's very common for. I mean, I know people who've had UFO contact experiences, and if there's a movie and there's like an owl shows up in a movie, oftentimes if an owl shows up,
Sure.
it's
The
just
fourth
signifying
kind.
that it's nighttime. You know, they'll have a clip of a little owl, like, but and they'll have that same reaction just from seeing it in a movie, like a very strong, visceral, emotional reaction. And I've heard that many times from people. And I'll have to say that it's the people who are reaching out to me that because of my website and the work I do is there a lot of them have had UFO contact and then they hear the owl connection and then they reach out to me to say like, what does this mean? And that's a tough one for me to answer. I usually
Mm.
can't answer that in any deep, meaningful way, but I can say that they're not alone. That
Hmm.
this is extremely common.
You did see the movie The Fourth Kind?
I did, yes.
Yeah. I thought their use of the visual imagery of how they portray the owl, and the effect they had on it, and the eyes widening and getting blacker was quite.
Super good visuals for a
It told me that
spooky movie.
the director um, had a passion for the subject. He knew more about it than just, oh, I got this script and this is how I see it. I got more out of it than that. It was difficult to watch the first time. The second time, I was able to to watch it, and watched it all the way to the end, all the way through the credits. And I got a very strong feeling that he cared about the subject, especially with the end. You remember the end, the credits?
I can't remember in the credits. They show video footage of what appears to be real life events.
They had recordings of real people describing things that they had seen, from pilots to all walks of life people.
Yeah.
It was very well done. And it was his way of saying, look, there's really something to all this. But the owls definitely got me.
Yeah. And I've heard many people say that they tried to watch that movie and absolutely could not.
Oh, you got to get through it. I think it's real important to face it and to get through it. And I mean, I love owls, and when they come to our big trees or the back of our house, there'll be 4 or 5 of them, gray horned owls. I'm sure that's what they are, because they're very soft. Ooh, 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 ooh.
Yeah.
They talk back and forth in the night, and so that's usually around 1:30 in the morning. They love the fog for some reason, and I just go out there and listen to them. I'm not afraid. I'm just fascinated.
Oh, I love them too. I'm not. I have no fear of owls.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, I love, and I'm in a place up in near the Canadian border. Well, I'm on the Olympic Peninsula in just west of Seattle. So this is a terrain with big trees and lots of owls.
Wow, what an incredible place to live. I spent a lot of time living in Bernie, California, um, up high. It's up high in the mountains, a little tiny town, and yeah, it's that just huge forest. Nobody
Yeah.
living there. Just I go hiking by myself in them all the time and come back home alive.
Well, I
You
try to
know,
get out as much as I can, but
yeah.
it's fairly populated where I am right here. It's a suburb of Seattle, but there's ferry stations not too far away. But wow, does it have a nice feel to it? With these big trees.
So, how has your work progressed since the last time we talked? I mean, certainly you must uh, have learned new things and heard new cases. And are you working on another book? I just want to bring everybody up to speed and on what you're doing.
About a year and a half ago, I published a novel. I wrote 3 nonfiction books, and one of them was sort of a memoir. It was my blog was 10 years old, and that blog sort of was a diary in a way of me coming to terms with my confirmation experience, where like I started the blog in 2009, where I was like, no way, this isn't happening to me. Like I initially started the blog where I was only talking about synchronicities. And then very quickly that turned to the subject of UFOs, which I did not want to go down that road. And it just felt like the synchronicities were all having to do with either UFOs or owls. And in the 10 years, I had a lot of experiences in those 10 years. And they all pointed to one thing, that I had some sort of UFO contact experience. So it was my diary, my very public diary of me coming to terms with that. So I turned that into a book. So that was one of the 3 books. The first was The Messengers. And that was the blue book, where I argue that owls and UFOs are somehow connected.
Right.
And then Stories from the Messengers were longer, more detailed stories. There's 19 chapters, and it's like 19 short stories where I write about 19 separate cases. And I really try to delve into the complexity of this overall phenomenon, where it's really challenging on a personal level. So that was the second book. And the third book was the memoir, which is called Hidden Experience. And then the fourth book was a novel, which came out last year, which was a really tough thing for me to do. That was sort of a COVID project. And I was, wherever, when the whole world was locked away for those years. And so I wrote a novel, and it's been very well received. The reviews are wonderful. I was really worried nobody would get it. But what had happened is I had been, because of my blog and because of my online presence, basically, my focus is UFOs and owls. So if anyone anywhere in the world Googles UFOs, owls, I am the first thing that comes up, and I'm about the next like about the
Wow.
next 25 things after that. So if anyone has an experience with a UFO and an owl, they are going to find me. I mean, if you just
That really puts you in the hot seat. You're
well,
being asked a question right now.
oh, here, I'll get to that in a second. That's because that's good. Okay. So and so in the book, I had collected so many stories, and all these stories they're very elusive, and there's a term, a Jungian author, I'll remember his name here in a little bit. He used the term mythopoetic, which is a term I just loved. This mythopoetic quality to dreams. Dreams have a mythopoetic quality, and I would say that owl experiences, especially in conjunction with UFOs, have a mythic poetic quality. So I was trying to tap into those stories, and I used a lot of the stories as a kind of starting point for events in the nonfiction book. And the book ends on sort of a cliffhanger. I'm not giving anything away, but and I was totally content with that. But while the readers weren't, so I got a lot of pushback from the readers, like, you can't do that. And so now I'm working on book 2, and it's been very slow going. The first novel was slow going. This one is, but I'm
not easy to write a book.
Oh, it's easy to start a book. It's not easy to finish a book. Yeah, that's so. Oh, what was the question that just came up?
I put it back up again.
What is the physics behind the telepathic control of the owl and the controller? I've heard this called a spreading of consciousness. Are you familiar? No, I'm not really familiar with this. So the implication is the controller would be the UFO occupant.
Mm-hmm.
Except that sort of falls apart when you look at the 5 separate modalities, because it's the highly charged human experience that would want to control the owl. Like, for instance, here's a very common account. Someone's walking through the forest at night. They look up, they see an owl. There's an owl in a tree. It might be spooky. It might be kind of incredible. Like, wow, look at that wonderful sighting. The owl flies off, and then basically a flying saucer passes right above them. So it goes, owl, flying saucer, boom, boom. They're co-joined in the experience. It happens very rarely the other way around. Very rarely do you see the UFO first and then the owl. It's usually the owl first. So, like, how did that owl get there? What is the mechanism of how the owl gets there? Like, I don't know. I can't. I could only speculate. But what I can say is that it is co-joined. The consistency of the stories tells me that absolutely. And so all I can say is, like, if you were like, we turn the clock back 600 years and you were living in a teepee in South Dakota, and you had a powerful owl experience that had a co-joined, let's say, light in the sky or some other paranormal, or what we would call paranormal, highly charged event, you could then go to the shaman in the village, and the village would say, oh, the owl is a sign. And then that, it might change from village to village what the archetypal lineage of that owl may have in connection to the tribe, let's say. So we don't live in that world anymore. People are still having owl experiences. Mm-hmm. We can't go to the shaman at the edge of the village because we don't have that. So they get on Google and they find me. I'm not a shaman, but I have read enough stories that I can say that, oh, this is, like, you're not alone in these.
Yeah.
And that, I've said that, I'm repeating myself from earlier, but
no,
90% of what someone needs to hear, I think, is that they're not alone. And this is for me, it has become a normal experience. I'm getting about 6 stories a day.
Wow.
That's 6 good owl stories a day in my email inbox. I cannot reply in any meaningful way to all of them.
Yeah, I know it's hard.
Oh, yeah.
It really is. I get a lot of email myself, and that applies to this whole phenomenon that this is actually the anniversary of Breaking the Silence. We started a year ago today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's really grown. Not in terms of subscribership and likes and all that kind of stuff, but it's but what's happened in a year is that I hope we've shown to people in this community that we can be trusted, that we're not big media, even though I worked for big media, I don't anymore. That we are here from them, so they don't have to feel alone, and they can tell their stories either anonymously through Mary's podcasts, as she reads their letters, and we get a lot of them, or they can go in front of camera and share it. But what you said is so true. It's just enough that they don't have to feel alone. And I get a lot of emails and a lot of comments thanking Mary and I for doing what we're doing, because now they don't feel alone, and they feel they've found some place they can be with other like-minded people who won't be judgmental. And it really does change your life. I mean, I remember when I first started going to Von Smith, and I had hypnotherapy with her, and I worked with the support groups and stuff there. Boy, did it help, because it was all new then. And I thought, you think you're going crazy, and then you find out, no, you're not. There's all these other people, and it just really, that knowledge alone really makes a difference.
Exactly. And I've worked with Yvonne, and I've been to one Zero meeting, and I've worked with her and met with her a handful of times. She used to host, when the conferences were in Laughlin, she would often host the experiencer support group meetings there. And I found that very, very, that more than anything, really helped me.
Yeah, well, I mean, because you have these experiences yourself, and you've illustrated them. Last time we were on the show, we showed the illustrations, which I just loved. Have you done any more illustrations since, and have you had any more experiences that would motivate you to illustrate them?
Not anything. So what I've had is certainly a lot of synchronicities.
Right.
And so that's been ongoing, and that has been ongoing for 15 years. It really ramped up when around 2006 or so, which is getting on 15 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
15, 20. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So
I know.
that's 20 years. So, but but so I haven't had anything overt, in a while. So it's interesting, because my sense, I don't need, nobody needs to prove anything to me at this point. So, for a while there, I did need the proof. I did need a very powerful overt event to make it clear to me that something was going on. And now that I'm in the place I am right now, I get so many stories from people, and I'm trying to look into the deeper meaning to them and to the symbology of these stories. So I don't feel like I need my own experiences the way I did at one point. I was so unsure, and all that fell apart when I had some impossible to ignore events in my life. I can't remember what we talked about the last time on the show, but
it's been a while.
Yeah.
It's been a few months, and this. Yeah, I know what you mean. It's for me, because it goes back so far into my childhood. You look back on those things that you remember quite well, but they feel dreamlike. And at some point in your adult life, like as I did when I walked into the kitchen that night and came face to face with a butcher block moving its legs in front of my refrigerator I was trying to get to, and it, then the mirage dropped, and I saw it for what it really was. I was just wide awake and thirsty, and trying to get some cold water out of the refrigerator, and there was a small being standing there looking at me. And even though it only lasted briefly, it was so clear to me that I was fully conscious, and there it was. And so that was it from that point on, pretty much. I just,
and
like
how old were you at that time?
Let's see, that would have been 94. So I was in my early 40s.
Okay. Wow, how interesting. Yeah. So my event would have been, I would have been almost 50. Yeah, when I had my event. So I watched the little animation that opens the show here, and I was watching that, and it was like, it was really eerie because there was the butcher block, and then all of a sudden the little legs are starting to move,
Yeah.
and then it cuts to this
Thank you, Lynn.
this the image of the gray being in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was pretty accurate. I could do better now with it. My animation skills have greatly improved since then, but it gets it across.
Yeah. Oh, I was
And
wondering whether that was, I was watching this and I was like, this is based on this is based on a real
yeah,
event.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's just one of those moments I never forgot. And the problem with the whole phenomenon, the experience, is that so many times you are fully conscious, but you don't remember. It's somehow suppressed in you, and you'll have a very vivid dream, and from your subconscious you will recall it, and then it's just passed over as a very strong dream, and that is until later on other events happen that are highly suggest that it wasn't a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And so after a while I start to be able to distinguish, I think, for myself. I can't prove it, to anyone, right? But for myself, I feel that when these dreams happen, it is recall of things that were suppressed that I'm remembering. The same way hypnosis will bring it out. And I've had a lot of that lately, and it's quite striking because those moments are so, it's almost like you're really there. It just,
Yeah.
I don't know if you've had hypnosis. Susan, thank you so much. Susan came to our studio and sat in front of her camera, and she's got an amazing story to tell, which where she was driving along in the desert with her friend and got stopped in the middle of the road by a bunch of 3.5 foot tall jackrabbits that weren't jackrabbits. That's the show that I'll be cutting, editing, and making after Judy's is done. So we have some amazing people like Judy and Ann Carter and Susan coming forward, and we're really grateful because it's very brave but it's also very helpful to all the people who have these experiences, and hopefully people watching the shows that are on the fence about this might come a little bit further over the other side of the fence with us, understanding that these things actually occur.
Yeah. And when I was talking with people, especially prepping for the first book, I just realized, like, in the way I said it, was like, it just feels like you just hear these people share their stories, and what happens is they'll tell kind of a surface story initially. And here's like, you can tell they've told certain stories a bunch of times, and then you listen and you ask questions, and then maybe you have a second conversation. Usually, most of these were over the phone for me, and then the story gets a little deeper and a little stranger. And you would think that if you collected enough story and you got someone's full story, you would be able to say, now I can clarify things. Now it gets simpler. But it doesn't, because the more stories they tell, they're telling you the stories that they're almost embarrassed or unsure whether to share with anyone. And those are the ones that are so weird. And you get this, like, you would think that the more questions you ask and the more answers you get, that the story would become more logical and more easy to digest. But that's not what happens at all. It's exactly the opposite. It gets weirder and more difficult to understand. And I think that in a way is a form of confirmation to me. Like, if someone told me a story and it wasn't weird and it played out logically,
Right.
I would doubt them.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure, because the experiences are so incredibly strange,
Exactly, yeah.
And so, well, it's everything that Carl Sagan suggested it would be if we were to actually have contact with an alien life form. Not that these are aliens, but that's what he said. And thank you, UFO Bong Theory podcast. That's a mouthful. Thank you. I think I know who you are.
And Carl Sagan said something to the effect of, it's not that the interacting with an alien life form would be strange, it would be so strange that we don't even are unable to recognize it.
Yes.
Something to that effect. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, nothing like seeing a butcher block moving. I really think that wasn't them projecting that image. I think it was my mind. Well, it had tan sort of legs like on Whitley's book cover. It was that color. The whole being had that color to it. So I think my mind just sort of went, George, thank you. Jeez, you guys. Went to that as what it could be, because it couldn't be what I was really seeing.
I
wonder,
understand that. Yeah.
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 But then I just could never forget that face looking at me, and I had the sense from it that it was sort of an moment, you know. I mean, it wasn't frightened of me, and it was probably meant to happen. I don't think it was by accident. At first I did, and I thought, I don't think that they do anything by accident.
Here, can I tell a little story? This is
relevant absolutely.
To exactly what you're saying.
That's why we have you on the show.
Yeah,
that's what I can blab.
There's no owls in the story, but there's
okay.
So I would have been 30 years old. I'm 62 now, so half my life ago and a little more. I was living in Maine, and this would have been the winter of 92, 93. And earlier in that summer, I had seen on VHS, I had seen the movie of Whitley Strieber's Communion. I'm seeing the bust behind you of the big-eyed gray being that was on the cover of Whitley's.
Yeah, we've been making those for a while, and Whitley signs them, and we're not doing anymore.
But yeah, that matches the cover. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so, but in the movie, there's a scene where Christopher Walken, it's near the end, he sort of walks into a forest, and I remember clearly, and I was working in the film industry at the time. I was just doing storyboards for TV commercials. I did some set building and some art direction and stuff.
Yeah, you were still in the business.
Yeah. But anyway, there's a scene where Christopher Walken's walking through the forest, and he's approaching this big bright light, and you could tell that it was a big movie light. Like he was just they pointed the movie light right at the camera. They just adjusted the aperture so it kind of blew it out a little bit, so it was overexposed. But there was just one point when we were like, "That's a movie light." And I remember sitting in the little living room of the place I was living in Wyoming at the time, and I said, "That's an easy way to do a special effect, right? Just plug in the light, point it. There's no computers involved. You don't have to have a special effects staff of hundreds. You just turn the aperture on your camera to a certain way, and then it's going to appear as just a infinitely bright light." So in my let's go fast forward maybe 6 months to that winter, and I'm living in upstate Maine at this point, and let me front load this. I was reading Bud Hopkins' book, Intruders.
Yeah.
Right at that point. So that was like on my bedside table when I had this dream. And then this allowed me to blow it off and deny it, because I could say, oh, it's just related to the book I was reading when I went to sleep. So I was alone in the house. The way the bed was, it was pushed up right against a window, and there was a bright light shining in the window. And so I sat up on one elbow, and I looked outside, and there was a bright light pouring in the room, and in front of that, like actually pretty close to being outside, like really close to the house, like not far away. I don't know, maybe 20 feet from the window, tops, were 5 gray beings walking towards the house, just like the being behind you. Like if I drew that, I would draw it a little bit differently. What I would draw was, and I did draw it it shows up in my books.
Well, yeah. Well, last time we had you on, you shared that with us.
Oh, so okay. Forgive me. I'm going to tell the same story, but I don't think I told this.
It was a great drawing. I wish I had access to it right now. It's somewhere in my computer. I don't want to look for it right now.
Don't worry. But I could send you it if you need it and now that the drawing had its own little drama to it too. So I sit up. I look out the window. There's 5 beings. And it's like, that's creepy. That was scary. They were walking towards the house, and my eye went from the beings to the white light. And I looked at this white light, and in my yard was a great big movie light pointing to the house.
Uh,
And I said in my mind, I said, that's a simple way to do a special effect. So I was mimicking exactly what I had done 6 months earlier when I watched the VHS cassette of Communion, the movie. And in that moment, I thought to myself, I'm just saying what I said when I saw the movie 6 months ago. And there's obviously no big bright movie light in my yard.
no.
So, and then I heard a voice in my head that said, oh, yes, they're here. Now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down. And I was like out like that. And oh, and then so that I might have said this before, but when I did the drawing, that would have been 93, and I did the drawing about 2007 or so. So that's 14 years later. And the like drawing that image of trying to capture those five beings in the yard through the window was like, I know what it means. I was a professional illustrator. I know just what it means to draw something. I know just what it means to like, I want to get it right. I gotta, but it was so unrelentingly emotional just drawing that image that
Sure.
that told me something, like that I had to go through this kind of like I really had to push through a lot of anxiety to get that drawing done. Like every fiber of my being said, no, I got to back off. I got to stop. I can't go. I can't do this. I can't do this. At the same time, I was like, I got to get this correct. I got to get this correct. I got to get this correct. So there was these two things, like fighting against each other. So that told me, that implied something, and I took that seriously, because until then I had been able to dismiss it. For instance, I had Bud Hopkins' book on the nightstand,
Mm-hmm.
and then and also, like, I know what it means to dream. I journal my dreams. I have a pretty good.
You do.
I have a pretty good knowledge of my own dream language and stuff like that. So what this did not, if I was to dream I was in my own bedroom, it would be distorted somehow. There would be some
Sure. Things aren't in the
irrational
right
quality.
place.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's even mirror image sometimes.
It's connected to, one room is it anyway. It was exactly the room I was in.
Yeah.
And when I woke up that morning, I just dismissed it as a dream, and I never even went to go out and look if there were footprints in the snow.
Yeah. Well, I think, I get the feeling that that happens. It's just a hunch that they don't want you to look into it much further. And if you do remember anything, they are hopeful that you'll just pass it off as a dream. I was saying, Whitley called the other night, and I said, I really think, Whitley, that they're controlling our memory or repressing the memory of the event is not so much about uncovering or exposing them as it is to protect you, so that you go on with your life without, becoming obsessed like Richard Dreyfuss and building Devil's Tower in your living room and straining your wife.
Me.
Yeah.
I was completely obsessed for 8 years. Like,
oh yeah. Well,
like, couldn't function.
That's so realistic. I mean, Spielberg, he knows about this stuff very, very well. He's worked with the best people there are, Jacques Vallée and Jalen Hynek, and he's very involved in it. And so that character was so realistic. And do you remember the first time you watched that film?
Oh my gosh, I saw it opening night. I was like 16 years old. I was the perfect age. In Southfield, Michigan, I went to the Americana Theater. It was the biggest theater in the little town I was living in, or I was a suburb of Detroit. Oh, I remember it. I wanted to be a filmmaker. I was doing animation and with my Super 8 camera, and I loved Jaws, and I was so primed for this movie, and I just loved it. Oh yeah, it had a huge impact on me.
How did you feel emotionally during the scenes when Dreyfuss, who did a really great job of portraying people that are affected by this phenomenon? I mean, he really put a lot into that character. I mean, it affected me emotionally. I'm watching it, and at that time, Communion had not come out.
Would be another
So
10 years almost. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And so all of us watching that film, it was a little bit like seeing the book cover in a way on communion years later. We're being affected by it and we didn't know why. And we mostly, none of us talked about the things that happened to us when we were kids or even as adults. And plenty of things did, especially during the 70s and 80s, all through my life. But during that time it was there. But I saw UFOs so often. There were so many strange things going on, but I never really connected the dots. And then I'm watching Richard Dreyfuss and the emotions he's going through, and I started feeling emotionally unstable watching it. I just felt like I was going to start crying, and I didn't know why. And I wonder if a lot of other people felt that way. The Barney and Betty Hill incident done by Universal, which was an incredible movie. I couldn't believe that they actually did the book.
James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons.
James Earl Jones, Estelle Parsons. I mean, she just fantastic. And when they, since they're such powerful actors, the first time I watched it and I was with my wife, I started to lose it, and she didn't understand what was going on. I didn't know what was going on, but I just it was a film I couldn't watch with people I didn't know or didn't have something to do with this, and nobody had anything to do with it that I knew back then. It was just me alone, and I couldn't watch that film with a bunch of other people because they all sit there going, and me, I felt myself just breaking down. And how can I relate to something, like that? It's like that scene with Richard Dreyfuss. How come I know so much?
Yeah. There's a scene where he's in like the what do they call it? The skiff. They lock him, the room that has the doors on it, and he's in there with Francois Truffaut and they're asking him, like the series of questions, and that was actually one of the more dramatic parts of the film in the sense that it didn't feel like a Spielberg movie at that point. It felt like much more like a Spielberg's movies are kind of
formula,
not really formula, but exactly. They're a Spielberg movie. That's, I guess, I was looking for the right word.
The camera's
the Spielberg movie is a regular
and
tracking camera and the John Williams music welling up, but that scene in particular felt like something more out of the parallax view rather than something out of a Steven Spielberg movie, where he's arguing with the UFO investigators in the skiff.
So that film did affect you emotionally then?
I think it was just, I loved that kind of filmmaking at the time. I was just at the right age. I feel, this is like I've done a lot of like self-examination. It feels like I was like click, like I was shut off, like I wasn't going there. And this stuff, when it started to happen to me a lot, starting around 2006, I was just like, no way, not me. I ain't going there. Like I could entertain that it's happened to other people, but not me. So, and all that fell apart, then in those years. And that was when I started acting like Richard Dreyfuss, that's not too much of an exaggeration. And so I went through hypnosis. Like, I think you should be cautiously, or for me, I need to be cautiously and appropriately skeptical of hypnosis, because you're like, what is a memory and what is the subconscious? And at the same time, I recognize how therapeutic it is. But I did a hypnosis session with Mary Rodwell in 2007. And 2017. And that wasn't too long, so 2017, I did a hypnosis session. I did it in the morning. There was a group of people, of experiencers, that were all meeting at a house in New Hampshire. At the time, I was living in upstate New York. So I went there to join these people. And I ended up, there was a big crowded house, and I ended up sleeping on the office floor of the fellows whose home it was. And I had a sleeping bag and a sleeping pad. It was just fine. I brought my own pillow, and it was autumn and the window was open. I left the window open. So Mary Rodwell and I were going to do a hypnosis session before 7. We're going to start before 7 in the morning because we wanted to do it when the house was quiet. So I'm laying there. The sun is coming up very early in the morning, and there is a barred owl, which is the loudest North American owl, right out the window, like booming. And
Wow.
It just as I'm like getting ready to walk into Mary's room to do my hypnosis session. So I lay down on Mary's bed, and she sits next to me, and she takes me through the induction, and a bunch of stuff comes up. But one thing that came up was she said, okay, where she did it like, where do you need to go to better understand what you're dealing with? Like, to better like, what do you need right now to be the most helpful and healing for you? And then all of a sudden I'm like, I'm walking in my yard. I'm in the yard when I lived in Idaho, and I lived in this little cabin. It was out in this horse pasture, and it was really idyllic. So it's nighttime. I'm walking to the house, and she said something which she asked me a bunch of times. She said, "Look down at your feet. What kind of shoes are you wearing?" Which was a way of grounding the person with something pragmatic. I looked down, I described my shoes, and they would have been some sort of sneakers or something like that, and were like lightweight hikers or something like that. So okay. So I walk in the house, and in my mind, there's like this way that the house was lit at night. Like when I'd flip the light on in the kitchen and the way the house was lit. And I flip the light on, and there in the kitchen, I have no memory of this consciously, so I cannot prove whether it's happened or not. I flip on the light, and there's a gray alien standing there in the kitchen. I have no fear at all. And I say, like, what are you doing here? And it says, and it replies telepathically, it says, that life you've been living, it's ending now. And this new life is about to begin. I have a quote. I have it written down. I transcribed it. That's pretty close. But it implied that the life you had been living this life up until this point, and you knew that it was going to end, and now it's ending, and this new life is coming about. And I put where I was in that house, and I put about the time it felt like. And so, I mean, I was there for 22 years in that house, but I could kind of say, oh, if the kitchen looked like this. And so, and that was right around the time when things like started. And so I can't say whether that is true, but wow, does it like pinpoint in the timeline of my life? That's when I turned into Richard Dreyfuss. Yeah. So
yeah, and you had this huge consciousness or shift in consciousness.
Well, there was shift in consciousness was trying to emerge, and I was trying to pound it back down with all my
right,
as hard as I could. So I was battling my own, like, I didn't want this to be true. And the more I fought it, the more incessant the synchronicities became. And then I started a blog, which was initially going to be only synchronicities. I had a lot of them, and the synchronicities make a great blog post, right? A couple paragraphs, so you can tell a great synchronicity story. But and it immediately, as soon as I started the blog, there were like UFO things started happening in my life, and I just started writing about them. But initially, there was hardly anyone. I mean, it was just, who knew? I had no idea, like, if anyone was ever going to read this thing. And right away, people were responding. It was really powerful. So I had a powerful group of, I want therapists. They weren't truly therapists, but they were playing the role of my therapists, the people who were interacting with me. So I became really good friends with the people who were writing stuff in the comments.
Yeah, you're getting a lot of them because we're getting towards the end here. That was one of them I caught because I'm listening to you so intently that I'm missing comments on the side here, and I'm sorry for that.
Oh, yeah. So this is so this Benno from Oz. I'm assuming his mother-in-law had died, and I'm assuming he saw an owl. And now the question I would ask, and maybe you can get an answer from the how close was the owl sighting in connection with the passing of your mother-in-law? And I'm assuming it happened after. What I'm finding is owls in death, it's parents mostly, and then other, friends and close friends and, family members and things like that. But wow, the number of parent stories I have is really high. Now, could it have been the spirit? Maybe. So I'll tell you one story. This happened to me. And this was, my mom died in 2013. And she was So that's over a decade ago. And I was living in Idaho at the time, and my sister was in North Carolina. So oh God, this story is so complex to tell the whole thing. It just goes on and on. But I was holding my mother's hand on one side of her hospice bed, and my sister was holding her hand on the other side of the hospice bed when she passed. It was a really powerful, beautiful moment. Beautiful. My mother had been suffering terribly from Alzheimer's, and her last couple of years of her life were scary for her, and she was sad and she was confused the whole time. It was really awful.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Other people have been through this too, but it felt like, how to say this? It felt like a very human event. Like I was not the first person to go through this, and it felt like a universal human experience to have that moment at my mother's passing. So I had already been doing the owl research. My brother and sister had no understanding of it. I would share it with them. I would sit and drink coffee with my sister. I was getting owl stories at that point. It's over a decade ago. And I would read and we'd drink coffee. And my sister's name is Jeannie. Jeannie, listen to this one. I'd read an owl story that came through the mail. We'd drink coffee the next morning and read another one. You could tell she was like, oh, what is going on with my poor little brother? And my other brother didn't want anything to do with it. I tried to bring it up and he was like, I'm not going there. So after my mother died, it was about 3 a.m. So the whole, we hadn't had any sleep, and we're trying to plan the funeral, and we're making phone calls, and we're talking to all our family friends and all my parents' friends. And I in the back of my mind said, oh, there's going to be an owl experience tied to this one. I know there's something coming. Like there's something. And so that night, it was actually the same day because my mother died at 3 a.m. At about 7 o'clock at night. We'd been busy all day. We were exhausted emotionally, and we're sitting on my sister's back deck. My brother and my sister. My sister's on one side of me. My brother's on the other side. I'm sitting in the middle, and we're drinking a glass of wine. And my sister's best friend from across the street, Ruthie, is sitting with us. Now, Ruthie is this wonderful, really heart-centered, wonderful woman, and she says, Mike, Jim, Jean, I know there is an afterlife, and I know because of an owl. And that was so fun. My sister literally did the thing where she said, owl, no, I don't want to hear about this. She put her hands over her ears, and my brother gave me this look like, did you tell Ruthie to tell this story? And I said, Ruthie, you don't understand. I've been doing this research, and I've been studying owls, and they show up often around highly charged times. I might have said UFOs. Even around UFOs, but I remember, and then please, I want to hear your story. She told the most tender, gentle story. So she had been grieving the death of her father, and she had been walking around the nature trail. I was walking my sister's dog around the same nature trail around this neighborhood. And she said, I was going on that nature trail once a day to process the grieving of my father. And every day I would pass a tree, and every day there was an owl in the tree. And then one day I passed the tree and I thought to myself, wait a minute, why is an owl out during the day? So I looked at this owl and I said, are you my daddy? And at that moment, all my grieving vanished. And I knew my father was fine. And that is what seems to be showing up in the research, as far as that it comes at a point when I got a lot of stories where people talk to the owl as if it is their dead parent, and it is a core part of their moving through the grief process. Sometimes it actually is eliminated upon talking to an owl. I have a lot of that. So my brother and sister got to hear, didn't come from me, didn't come from some letter I got in an email. It came from my sister's very best friend, who had never told it to my sister, and she did it in the context of me and my sister and brother, so they had a direct experience of Mike's not making this stuff up. Mike is not following flights of fancy. He's talking to very grounded people who have these powerful stories. So that story is so multi-layered, and I don't know what the events are, but the owl, was Ruthie's father in that owl? The spirit, I can't answer that. What I can say is Ruthie moved through the grieving process and said her father is in a better place because of that owl. That to me is almost more important. There, sorry, that was a long story. I might have even told that one
That's okay.
last time we
That's
talked.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have you back again. This just because I'm sure you have a lot more to share with us.
Oh, I'm not going to run out of stories. Yeah.
No,
So,
many of us don't. Have that ability to run out, but hearing yours, they're very comforting and very reassuring on that same level again that you're not alone.
and when I started this research with the owl stuff, like I didn't know where it was going. Like some of the stories are really scary. That doesn't necessarily make it bad, but I found these stories very heartening and very reassuring. And I wrote a book that feels benevolent. I didn't expect that. I didn't go into the book saying I want to write a benevolent book, but that's the overwhelming number of, that was the message of, I'm cautious to say 100% because that would be incorrect, but that was certainly the message of most of the stories, the vast majority. So, and to be fair, I'm only looking at people with owl and UFO experiences, this little sliver
Sure.
of the UFO thing. So I'm not looking at the big totality, but within that little sliver, it's very heartening and reassuring, the kinds of stories that show up, like the story that just showed up with Ruthie, that I just told with Ruthie.
That was an amazing story. I don't know how much you've paid attention or researched near-death experiences and people who, mediums that have been able to have contact with people who are in the afterlife, in the astral plane. And some of these recordings date back into the 50s. Have you spent any time listening to those?
I am completely obsessed. I don't have any UFO books on my shelf anymore. They're all turning into near-death experience books.
Ha!
I am totally obsessed.
Me too.
I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and she said, and she wrote a book about the near-death experience. Her name is Sharon Hewitt Rowlett, and I kind of was like, oh my God, I just feel like there's podcasts where it's just people talking into the microphone, telling their near-death experience. And
they're amazing.
And she summed it up. I said, oh my God, I just need to listen to these things. And she said, yeah, you don't need to go to church anymore, right? You listen to these stories, you no longer need to go to church. They have that kind of power. So yeah, and what I'm finding is that, and I'm not the only one who's done this. Kenneth Ring is an author that has certainly addressed this. Whitley is right.
Whitley and I talk
very
about
skilled.
it a lot.
So
Yeah.
the near-death experience and the UFO contact experience seem to be like, there's so much similarity in the feel and the intensity and the overall message between. So I'm absolutely, and I said I wrote the novel. Oh, there's so much near-death experience stuff there, and it's blended in with the UFO stuff. Where I don't want the reader to know where one begins and the other ends, essentially.
Well, when we have you back, I think this is probably a topic we should discuss, because I know that a lot of people in the community of people who have these experiences, some of them are having a hard time understanding how they relate.
And you have to look at it like a poet. I'm not saying that to be flippant, but you can't look at it like a pragmatic scientist. You have to let go of the pragmatic side of your mind. You have to let go of the literal and engage the metaphorical, or let it speak to you at an intuitive level, not at a logical level. And
why did I have a gut feeling you were
when you said that, I almost laughed, because I just listened just like 5 minutes before we were on. I listened to a podcast, which was beautiful.
Wow. It's an incredible synchronicity. I don't know how. I know that Whitley and I talk quite often, and we've had the same synchronicity about about all the subjects, as you say, coming together. But lately, and maybe it's because, I got 10 years on you. We're all getting a little closer to the veil. I think that subject's going to become more interesting. But I have to say, in closing, that going back as far as I can remember, I always knew there was an afterlife. It
And
was
so did I.
intuitive.
So did I. Yeah.
It was intuitive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always have. And then what happens is the people, when I started really doing, remember I said, you ask the question, you talk to someone who's had a contact experience, and you ask the next question, you ask the next question. The number of people who have had the UFO contact experience, that should be statistically small, right? There's more people than, I don't know what percentage of the population. It's more than we would dare guess. And then the
Yes.
number of people who have who have had near death experience should be small, but and then so in essence, if there's two different disparate populations, it should be very, very small that people have had both, but it's not. It's actually very high that people who have had the UFO contact experience have also had the near-death experience. It shouldn't, if it's random, what it tells me is there's something much more profound going on.
That's absolutely correct. And there's also, for me, I have not had a near-death experience, but because someone, when I was in the 70s, and I did a show about it, it was called The Gift. I recently finished that one. It premiered about 3 weeks ago, and it was about this young girl that we were in love, and she was 24 and I was 26, and I'll make it real quick. But she didn't spend the night at my house that one night. She had a brain aneurysm during the night. No, I had no knowledge of this, but she came to me in my sleep because she was someone that human life, and also me to tell me that I was correct about those things and that she loved me and she had to leave. And I was in this place that was just all color and this ambient music. It was very cliche, but I got, and the most striking thing about it was, and then finding out that when she had died and she had fallen off the couch, and how she was found. I saw how she was under a pair of underwear because she just had it. A weird dream was all about, because out later that those conditions, and I've never forgot it all my life. So I think it's possible also that people into that realm for a while. Makes it kind of a near-death experience. Hard to describe, Mike.
You're breaking up a little bit. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, you're breaking up a little bit. I think I get everything you said. It was just a little broken, but I know people who are researching the shared near-death experience. People who have a shared near-death. Someone dies, someone travels with them on their death. Oh my God, that is an integral part of the book that I'm writing, is the shared near-death experience. I played around with it so it fit the story, but and within my novel, that's central to the story.
Right. Wow. Well, would you like to come back and talk about
anytime?
this?
Anytime.
Okay, that would be great. Really, thanks for being here tonight. I so much enjoy these conversations. I know that all the people here do as well, and they really appreciate you. They're very excited to know you were going to be on tonight, because these conversations are meaningful, deep, and I think they really help a great deal.
I agree. And I never, like, this was so, like, my life has changed so much. The fact that I'm doing this kind of work right now, and that I can speak so openly about emotions and memories and the mystical is something I never ever would have done in a earlier chapter of my life.
And when you take those walks in the woods, doesn't your environment just seem so much more enhanced today than it ever has been.
Hopefully everything does. If I do
Yeah.
this right, if I'm really walking down the aisle of the grocery store should feel just as enhanced, and waiting in
Right.
line at the to
Yeah.
yeah, everything should feel more enhanced. Yeah. So I'm trying my best. I fail. I'm not perfect, but I'm trying to like live my life with a heightened. I mean, I know just what it means to like walk through the forest on a beautiful fall day, and how
Right.
reverent that is. But I try to drag that along with me and make it happen. I'm imperfect. It doesn't happen all the time, but I sure do try.
You're being thanked. Okay, Mike. Well,
This was great.
thanks for another great show.
Yeah.
And for everyone interested in Mike's work, his books, I listed his website and where you can get his books in the description for this show. And of course, this show is recorded and it'll be on YouTube forever for you to come back to and watch again. I imagine many people who watch the show are going to reach out to you. You're going to get more emails.
Oh, great. Yeah, please. I'm all for it. Yeah.
All right, Mike. Thanks so much again. I really appreciate it.
This was great.
You bet. And thank you, everyone.